Hello everyone and welcome to a very special, well they're all very special to me, episode of Astartes. Today we're just going to be going over the provenances from the militia PDF that came out a few months ago. I have seen a lot of discourse online from people saying that militia is bad, and while I definitely think it performs a specific type of thing, there are some bits of information you should know, and I've got some ideas for you today on how to run them, how to put it together, and a couple of suggestions for ways that you might be able to make your flavorful militia force or allied force come to life. I want to take a moment here and deliver a word from our sponsors. Yeah, that's intentional dead space. We have no sponsors here at Astartes. While I definitely would like to look into something like that going forward, the point is that in the meantime, that this little project that I've been running for a year is just self-funded. And while it's not like I'm spending loads of cash on this, there are monthly costs that we have to pay to store the podcast. We've had to buy equipment. We pay for graphic design fees for different things here and there for the podcast. And then, of course, anything we want to buy to review. While I'm definitely not trying to turn this into a commercial venture of any stretch or imagination, it is the dream. It totally is the dream that Astartes could at least be budget neutral. So if you can see it in your heart or your wallet to buy me a coffee with the link below, or buy Hazel a treat if it makes you feel better, so that we could just get a little bit of revenue coming in, that would be so great. The dream, like I said, maybe upcoming, we could have a point where I review a new rulebook and it's something that's actually been paid for by the channel. That would be really remarkable for me, and it would be really awesome. And a great way to help ensure that I can continue doing this beyond past the good grace of my wife letting me sneak down and hide away from the family periodically to sit in the corner of a basement and talk into a microphone. But anyway, like and subscribe as per normal, but then if you could think about dropping a tip, also would be really appreciated. Now let's get that nonsense out of the way, and let's get back to the fun stuff. So what I've done here is I've divided up all of the provenances that are available, and I've categorized them, as opposed to just going down the line. I've categorized them into essentially 3 different categories, and what those provenances actually do. So the 3 categories are on your screen here, and they are a change to statistics, force organization, chart manipulation, or adding rules and wargear. And some of them are a combination of the both, and so you'll see in parentheses there denoting that, I don't know, I guess arbitrarily I sort of decided which of those are the primary and which of these are the secondary effects of the provenance. And so I decided to put the secondary effects into parentheses, but it's all what it is. There are, of course, limitations as well, and those are also present on your screen there, so you can just see how I've sort of broken them all down. But anyway, now let's go through and look at all of them together. So the first one that we're going to talk about is Warrior Elite, and what this does is that all eligible units and models receive a +1 to the leadership characteristic to a 9 maximum, and Imperialis Militia Levy squads in this detachment gain the support squad special rule, and Imperialis Militia Grenadier squads in a detachment with this provenance lose the support squad special rule. So what this means is, obviously, like a +1 to leadership is pretty excellent, especially when we're talking about an army which standard infantry, their leadership is 6, and that's with the sergeant that they have in the squad. If the sergeant dies, they are only leadership 5. So going from a 6 to a 7 with a sergeant, it's going to dramatically increase your chance of passing leadership tests, which is really important because all militia have a special rule, which is going to impact their ability to survive those leadership tests. Among other things, the militia subtype has a rule that says that they can only regroup after failing a leadership test if the unit includes at least half of the models that it included at the beginning of the battle. So if more than half of its models have been removed as casualties, then it may not regroup, and it must continue to fall back until it leaves play. So I suppose that means it can continue to snapshoot as it's falling back, but that's about all it's going to do as it's running away from you. So obviously this is not great because they're not going to be doing much for you, as they are just walking off the back of the board. In addition to that, a unit that includes any models with a militia subtype that is falling back and is successfully charged by an enemy unit is automatically just removed from play. Basically, it's like if you're charged while you're falling back, you might as well have been swept. So a +1 to leadership is really, really quite excellent. for this rite of war. On top of that, you are granting the support rule to the Militia Levy Squad, which is the even cheaper and worse form of infantry available to the militia. They have the same leadership, so that part doesn't matter, but their weapon skill and ballistic skill is only 2, and they have a special rule that says that if they fail a morale check, they just run. So you get the support squad for this rule, so you can't stack up on them. At least you can't fill your compulsory spots with them. However, you can take the Grenadier squads with your compulsory troop choices. So the Grenadier squads, if you don't know, they're just like a slightly more elite squad. The problem with the Grenadier squad is that when you compare the Grenadiers to the standard militia squad, in my opinion, they aren't actually doing that much more for you, and so they feel a little bit more expensive to run on the board. One thing that has been pointed out by Goonhammer and other places is that the Imperialis Militia Grenadier Squad, the way it's built and the options that it gets, if you have purchased some of the Cadian new plastics for the 40k range and you wanted to use them here, Grenadier Squads are actually a great way to represent those. So this is still definitely a provenance that you might consider if that's how you're going to get your models for this. And also, you know, that's the fluff that you're going for. +1 leadership, definitely good, definitely decent. The next one in this category of stat improvement is the Legacy of the Great Crusade. And this causes all Grenadier squads, militia command cadres, and discipline masters in a detachment with this provenance to increase their ballistic skill by 1 to a maximum of 4. And a force commander in a detachment with this provenance increases its initiative to 5. So this is definitely representing something, and I could definitely see people trying to pair the warrior elite with the Legacy of the Last Crusade. You're already trying to go with more elite force, and so you take all your standard militia, which pretty much everything in here is ballistic skill 3, and make it ballistic skill 4, so you're hitting on 3s instead of 4s. It definitely fits that concept. The warrior elite, they'd have 1 more leadership. Those select squads of elite soldiers will have 1 higher ballistic skill. That's really awesome. The biggest thing for me about this one is that the Grenadier squads in particular, which is where you're going to see the most impact for this rule because you're going to be able to buy multiple of them because they exist on the troop spot, they're just not that great, as I mentioned before. They're fine, but for what they do, they are considerably more expensive for the number of bodies and ablative wounds that you get, and I have a feeling that most people playing militia are going to be going for that huge number of models on the board spread out to try to territory and provide screens for other units. So the combination is not necessarily excellent here, but it is a good way of representing, and flavorfully, I definitely think Warrior Elite and Legacy of the Great Crusade are maybe the first combination that really just makes sense as far as the flavor and the fluff, even if the rules are not going to get that much of an impact for you. The next one with a stat boost or change is going to be the Feral Warriors. And what this does is that all militia squads are getting a +1 to their weapon skill characteristic for the duration of any player turn in which they make a successful charge. However, an eligible unit that begins the controlling player's assault phase within 12 inches of 1 or more enemy units must have a charge declared for it, though the controlling player may choose the target of this charge. So +1 to weapon skill is good. And especially good considering that you have a wargear option that you can actually also add on here. And so this is going to be our first double dipper. You can give all models chain axes in this provenance. And that's +2 points, taking a basic close combat weapon and giving it +2 points per model. Or you can upgrade a chain sword to a chain axe for just 1 point per model. The standard militia infantry squad comes equipped with a lasgun or an auto rifle, but for free, you can exchange that rifle with a close combat weapon and an auto pistol or las pistol. So you can swap it out. You can basically do that. So then basically, if you're taking the standard squad, 80 points is the base for 20 models. And then for 20 points times 2, you can get up to 120 points. And now this Imperialis Militia Infantry Squad has chain axes. Charging, getting up to weapon skill 4, makes them as good as standard Marines. If you manage to keep all of them alive long enough to get across the board where they can charge, that's 3 times 20. That's 60 attacks at weapon skill 4. Strength 4 also, because of the chain axes, base of 3 plus 1 with shred. So, I mean, it'd be pretty decent against weapon skill 4 things in the Imperial, in the Marine range. Still pretty bad against anything with weapon skill 5. And for 120 points, 20 models with these chain axes, they're still real weak. They're still going to have problems with morale and whatever else. So they're probably going to be good for 1 charge. Yeah, probably 1 charge. It's definitely fun, and if you like chain axes, and who doesn't, this is definitely one to consider. I'm not sold on how great it is. It's not the style that I would play, but it would work. The next one is the Kinfolk Helots, and this is one that you might use with if you were going to go with a slightly more mutant, afflicted militia force. All eligible units and models increase get a +1 to their toughness, but also lower their initiative and movement characteristic by 1. Yikes. All models in this detachment with this provenance in the character subtype gain Battlesmith 6+, or if they have the independent character special rule, they gain the Battlesmith 5+ special rule instead. This provenance cannot be chosen in conjunction with the Ogren conscript province. Okay, so we got a restriction here, and obviously, and a little bit of a tease to what's coming ahead, Ogren conscripts is the one that allows you to take Ogrens as troops. Clearly, they don't want you to be able to take something with a higher than normal toughness and just give it a +1. That sounds bad, so it makes sense that this is in here for that. Now, the Battlesmith is interesting. You could attach Kinfolk Helots, and if you also were bringing something with quite a bit of armor, that then you could utilize this Battlesmith rule. Not that a 5+ or 6+ on a Battlesmith is something that you will be able to count on in any way, shape, or form, but it definitely is interesting. Probably what you're looking for here, or what you're more interested in here, is the +1 to toughness. Going from a base tough 3 to tough 4 does do a lot, considering how important tough 4 is. Definitely moving away from almost everything in the game wounds me on a 3 to almost everything in the game wounds me on a 4. And considering the number of models that you're likely to have, that is a pretty nice little benefit here. That being said, there's definitely other ones that also are going to increase your survivability or whatever else, but I could definitely see this. Of all the ones with the stat increases, I would have to say that the Warrior Elite is the one that stands out to me as the most immediately effective, considering the problems with morale that you are going to have. Not that going from a Leadership 6 to Leadership 7 is going to save the day and make you stay on the board all that much better, but considering how big of a problem running is going to be for militia players, a +1 dramatically increases the likelihood, especially around that 7 leadership mark, being that 7 is the most likely number to be rolled in its multiple combinations on 2d6. It's definitely a big boost for you. Also, as noted before, I think that Warrior Elite and Legacy of the Great Crusade as a combination is something that definitely makes a thematic sense to represent a specific type of force. You're looking at an organization that has stuck together through the Great Crusade, or maybe a retired group of grumpy old vets who are here to stand on the line one last time at the gates of Terra. That's how I envision it. Anyway, I like it. It's fun. Definitely not the strongest option available for the militia, but definitely fun. Next up, we're going to talk about the Force Organization Chart manipulations, the provenances that specifically do something like that. And we're going to start with Clanfolk Levy. Clanfolk Levy allows a detachment with this provenance. They can fill compulsory troops choices only with Imperialis Militia Cavalry Squads, with all models in the cavalry squads selected as compulsory troops gaining a +1 bonus to leadership, and it specifically notes that this does not allow them to be taken as non-compulsory troop choices. So you can take 2 squads of cavalry as your compulsory troop choices, no more. In addition, a detachment with this provenance may include 4 additional fast attack choices, but these additional choices may only be used to select the Imperialis Militia Cavalry Squads. So it does add a leadership if you take them in the compulsory spot. And this is one that a lot of people were excited about, if only for the novelty of just bringing horses. And the Cavalry Squad's not terrible. It's kind of, it can get expensive. The biggest problem is that just like everything else, they are just toughness 3. They have the 5+ save, just like everything else does. They can get a bunch of upgrades, but then you start getting pretty expensive. The one thing that people are looking at, and I think is something to look at in particular, is the Militia Lance. The Militia Lance is a 5-point upgrade that you can add to every single one of these guys. And the Militia Lance it's a melee weapon, which has Strength 7, AP 3, melee ungainly, which just means that you only get one attack with it, Brutal 2, Sudden Strike 2, and Two-Handed. So the Brutal 2 is interesting here. It's got some problems, of course. You're still striking on Weapon Skill 3, so you're hitting anything, pretty much anything at all, at 5 up to hit, for the most part. Sudden Strike 2 does mean that you get to strike first, probably, so you'll at least get a chance to do it. And Strength 7, Brutal 2, AP 3 at least means that when you hit, if you wound, you're probably going to take out something. At least as far as regular Marines go. It's definitely fun, cool, and I think probably one of those units that, like, most militia players will field, just because I think I've got 15 of the Krieg horse riders, and so I will probably use one of these squads, but I don't know if it's enough to I'm not enough of a horse aficionado to go all in on the Provenance. Still, though, pretty interesting Provenance. The +1 to leadership is very nice for those two squads, especially if you are going to just, not be bringing a ton of other infantry if you're thinking about doing something else. This is definitely one that you might consider. It would definitely be a cool way to put together a militia force that is more mounted, transport-based, without buying a bunch of cargo haulers, because that's one thing that the militia force lacks, is it has a difficult time accessing transports. You actually don't have any dedicated transports, so you've got to pay through your fast attack choices for those. So, this Provenance actually helps with that in a number of ways. One, by allowing you to take these guys as troops, and then also by giving you free fast attack choices if you want even more horses, so that you don't feel like you are pinching your fast attack slot, which isn't that crowded at all anyway, but still, the options are nice. We're going to move right into Ogryn Conscripts. And Ogryn Conscripts is a detachment that allows you to take Ogryn Brute squads as troop choices, with those selected as compulsory choices gaining line. So not only do they become troop, but they gain line, which is great. The compulsory ones, anyway. All Discipline Masters, Medicae Militia, and Force Commanders selected as part of a detachment with this Provenance can join these Ogryn Brute squads, ignoring the usual restriction for joining a unit with the monstrous unit subtype. So that's really important, because the Brutes, before this, they couldn't take any of those support characters. They couldn't have, independent characters with them. So Ogryn Conscripts actually allows you to do a lot of things. One, of course, it allows you to take these very tough models as troop choices, and the Ogryns are actually pretty decent in this list. Two is that it allows you to give your HQ actually kind of a more tough, resilient bodyguard, because the rest of the militia unit, there's a lot of ways to fry that HQ. They're not gonna live super long. And then also, you can add them. You can give them a Medicae. You can do a lot of different things. So it's very cool, very interesting. And like I said, Ogryns are fun. If it's definitely would give you a chance to field a different kind of looking list for sure. Ogryns also have some hilarious wargear. So they are strength and toughness 5 with 3 wounds. And so, they're thick. They're regular, proper thick. They come with flak armor for a 5+ save. You can buy the whole unit flak armor, you can buy the whole unit carapace armor for 25 points, which means that you are getting a benefit out of bulking this squad up. If you buy it for 3 Ogryn Brutes, it's 25 points. If you buy it for 10 Ogryn Brutes, it's 25 points. So any model in the unit can choose to take additional items. You can take an additional close combat weapon, which is, additional attack. That's good. A Ripper gun, which is fine. The Thunder Stub, and then the Boarding Shield. So the Boarding Shield, of course, is just going to give you that additional survivability. But I should talk briefly about the Thunder Stub. So the Thunder Stub is a 6-inch range, Strength 6, AP 4, Pistol 1, Brutal 2, and Concussive. So, 6 inches of range. So you gotta be real close to use this thing. Brutal 2 is really funny to have on a pistol. And at strength 6, it means you're going to be wounding on Marine equivalents or worse, very consistently. And then concussive, so you even have to force your opponent to take a test. I definitely would include at least one of these in a squad, just because especially if you're going to be able to set up a very close charge. The concussive test, people do fail concussion tests. concussive tests, and then having that lower their stats it's really going to be effective against for a close combat unit like the Ogryns end up being. So I really like the Ogryn conscripts. I really like the Ogryn conscripts provenance. I think it's really fun. I mean, if I had the models, I would totally do this. The next one up honestly, this is the one that I was looking for. I was looking for something of this variety as soon as the PDF came out, and I found it, and it was everything that I hoped for and kind of more. Arguably the most powerful of the provenances. Definitely very, very, very strong for a lot of reasons. So this detachment, a detachment with this provenance gets to select 2 additional heavy support choices if it wants to, but they must be filled with Imperialis Militia Layman Russ units. In addition, all of the Militia Layman Russ units selected for a detachment with this provenance gain the following option: that you can add up to 5 additional Layman Russ for 120 points each. Last thing. This provenance cannot be taken in conjunction with Unending Horde, Debased Rabble, Tainted Flesh, or the Ogryn Conscripts provenances. So they very much do not want you to take this super tank one with any of the super infantry options. That's fine. I think this is the most restricted provenance, which totally makes sense because it is absolutely nutty what you get for this. So we got to talk about the Layman Russ, what all this does for you. So first of all, you get 2 additional heavy support choices. So if you're running this in a main detachment, you can have 5 heavy support choices. 2 of them have to be Layman Russes if you're going to use them, which is fine because the Layman Russ is one of the best units in this list. In addition, all of those can now squadron with up to 6 tanks in a squadron. So why is this important? Well, the Layman Russ as it exists in the standard PDF is a squadron of 1. End of discussion. There's nothing else you can do about it. So you can only ever have 1 tank with a heavy support choice, which is really, really restrictive. You're not going to be able to bulk this out very much. You're not going to be able to do much with it. And that's really too bad because the Layman Russ is actually pretty good. So it's movement 10, ballistic skill 3, which is what you would expect, front armor 14, side armor 13, rear armor 10, and 4 hull points. For 120 points, you get a tank with more hull points than a Predator, better armor than a Predator. However, it does, of course, have that 3rd line special rule, so every glance against this vehicle counts as a penetrating hit, but, whatever. On top of that, it has a couple of absolutely insane options for its main gun. So this Layman Russ, for whatever reason, they cannot take side sponsons, so just forget that entirely. You've got old guard tanks with sponsons. You're just going to have to pretend they're out of ammo or something. You have your main gun. You have a full front-mounted heavy bolter that can be exchanged for a flamer, a multi-laser, or a las cannon. And then you can take a couple of pintle-mounted options. Of course, you can still take your standard, hunter killer missile, dozer blade, searchlights. I would, of course, always suggest the dozer blade if you want the tanks to move at all. But it's 5 points. It's such an easy auto-include. It's not even worth talking about. The 2 really interesting options for me, as far as keeping this gun cheap but effective, are the Vanquisher Battle Cannon with a coaxial mounted autocannon and the Executioner Plasma Cannon. So, whether or not this is a typo or whatever, the Executioner Plasma Cannon has roughly the same stat line you would expect. It is, however, 48 inches range instead of the 36, which I think is pretty typical for plasma cannons. Strength 7, AP 4, Heavy 1, Large Blast, and a Rending 4+. I want to point out that it does not say Breaching 4+, it says Rending 4+. On top of that, there is also no Gets Hot for this plasma. So for whatever reason, maybe the whole vehicle's running hot anyway, they felt it wouldn't be kind. Maybe they just thought they don't want to cause a penetrating hit when you roll a 1 on this thing, but whatever. The point is that the Executioner Plasma Cannon does not get hot. Now, with the Ballistic Skill 3, you are scattering like crazy, so that is definitely something you have to consider, and it is a 25-point upgrade, but the Executioner Plasma Cannon is, just effectively better than Plasma for a lot of the other options in the 30k setting, which is interesting. Now, another option, and the one that people are going to look at also and just go, wow, this is nuts. For only 5 points, you can upgrade to the Vanquisher Battle Cannon, which is a 72-inch range. That's nuts, 72 inches. Strength 9, AP 2, Heavy 2, Sunder, and Brutal 2. So you get 2 shots. You get the Sunder that you're really looking for. It's Strength 9, and it has Brutal 2. So this means that it's even, like, really effective if you have to, like, shoot it at something with, like, a 2+ save and a couple of wounds to try to kill, like, a Terminators or whatever. If you're really stuck and you need that, you can. It's more effective than a las cannon because you've got the 2 shots. It's really awesome. And it's also got the coaxial autocannon, so it's going to help you hit, make yourself a little bit more accurate. And it's only 5 points for this. So there is a reason why the Industrial Stronghold is perhaps the strongest, and it's just because Leman Russes, with their cheapness, with their wargear options, and with the ability to, I mean, on top of everything else, you can spam these tanks with Industrial Stronghold, and they're not worth points if your opponent kills them because of the third line rule. They're easier to destroy than other vehicles, but you're going to have quite a few of them, and they're not worth anything if we kill them. So it's really, really good, really strong, and there's just so many stories that involve just tons of these, Leman Russes, hopping around. It definitely is something that I know I will see from people. And it seems like every Imperial Guard player already has like 20 of Leman Russ tanks anyway, so it'd be a pretty easy move for some of you. Now, there are 3 other provenances that affect the Force Org chart, which are Debased Rabble, Tainted Flesh, and Unending Horde. And we're going to skip those for now because like I said before, I think their effects here, or their comments here, are secondary. We're just going to move on to the last section, which is the adding rules and wargear. So the first provenance here is the Gene Crafted, and this one says that once all models have been deployed, but before the beginning of either player's turn, the controlling player must roll once for each unit that contains any eligible units on the table below. There are 3 results for this. Let's start with the worst first. If you roll a 1, the unit begins battle pinned, and then this overrides any rule that would normally allow a unit to ignore being pinned, such as being cavalry or any warlord trait. If the unit is embarked, then it actually must take an emergency disembarkation, and then it is pinned. Units in reserve ignore this effect and suffer no penalty or benefit when they enter play. So this is obviously very bad. If you roll a 1, this unit gets absolutely nothing from this provenance. On a 2 through 5, all eligible models in the unit with the infantry or cavalry unit type gain one of the following special rules selected by the controlling player for the duration of the battle: Fleet 2, Move Through Cover, or Night Vision. Obviously, some of these are really good. Fleet 2 actually is not bad at all. The ability to move, run, and reposition your infantry with a 2-inch extra move, or charge if you need to. That's pretty strong. While the phrasing seems off, this would mean that Gene Crafted, potentially getting Fleet, if you were banking on getting Fleet or something like that, or even Move Through Cover. This would be pretty strong with that Feral Warriors if you were trying to go for the melee-focused militia dudes with chain axes build. But Night Vision is also just really excellent, the ability to see and ignore all those penalties. Especially important if there is night fighting, because let's be honest, the militia cannot stand to lose any more leadership than they already don't have. Going from a 6 to a 5, or even a 4 without a sergeant is, that would be very, very painful for these squads. You might as well just, if they get shot at 25% of their models, you might as well just take them off the board. Now 6, though, is pretty bonkers. All eligible models in the unit with the infantry or cavalry type gain one of the following benefits for the duration of the battle: Relentless, Stubborn, Adamantium Will 6+, or all of the special rules presented for results 2 through 5, meaning Fleet, Move Through Cover, and Night Vision. So you can't obviously count on this happening because you're rolling a 6. Stubborn would be absolutely fantastic. So would Relentless in certain circumstances, especially if you were pairing Gene Crafted with, say, one that we're going to talk about in a minute, which is Survivors of the Dark Age, Armory of Old Night, which is one that's going to basically have all your regular guys can have the heavy version, the las rifles. But again, you can't count on it. You can't count on it, and if you think it will happen, it almost guaranteed won't. However, on a 2 through 6, you're either going to be able to get Fleet, Move Through Cover, or Night Vision. And so I would think that this is definitely one that you would consider if you were going to think about an infantry or cavalry focused list that you were trying to really move across the board. Being able to take all 3, Fleet, Move Through Cover, and Night Vision would be really, really excellent, perhaps even better than Relentless or Stubborn, but at the very least, you can feel confident that you're probably going to get Fleet or Move Through Cover. I really like this one. I'm not sure how I would model it, but it would definitely be pretty cool, and especially, like I said, if you were focused on that movement-dedicated sort of concept. It's definitely pretty decent. The next one is the Cyber Augmetics. All eligible units and models gain Feel No Pain 6+, and then also the Slow and Purposeful special rules. This provenance may not be chosen in conjunction with Gene Crafted, and any detachment with this provenance is treated as sworn brothers by any detachment with a Mechanicum faction in the same army, which is cool. So this would definitely be one to take or consider taking if you were going to ally in some Mechanicum, or if you were going to use these guys as an allied detachment with some Mechanicum. Cyber Augmetics, for example, and Industrial Stronghold, if that's what you were looking for. Although perhaps it might even be better to consider connecting this with Armory of Old Knight, because Slow and Purposeful would allow you to move and fire heavy weapons, and so that would be better for, like, let's say if you were going to go with a full las rifle build. Regardless, though, it's definitely fun, flavorful, and something that I would consider a look at if your main force is Mechanicum. I don't know why, I just feel like Militia are, and I'm sorry for the Militia players who mained this in last edition. It just feels, the general vibe sometimes feels to me that Militia is maybe sort of designed to be an allied force, or maybe that's just the way it's looking to me from the surface. But regardless, there are some definitely cool things you can do with it in that regard. Okay, the next up is the Alchem Jackers, and these have some pretty impressive special rules. Alchem Jackers means that you do not suffer negative modifiers to leadership characteristic in the assault phase, and in addition, if less than half the models in the unit have been removed as casualty and a morale check made for it due to shooting phase is failed, they just become pinned instead of falling back. If more than half of the models in the unit have been removed as casualties, then it must fall back as normal. In addition, all models in any unit with this provenance can be upgraded to have the Furious Charge special rule for 25 points per unit. So, definitely getting stubborn in the assault phase is good, because you're going to need that so that you don't get just absolutely destroyed in the combat and then fail your already miserable leadership. Stubborn is good for that. The ability to be pinned instead of losing a morale check is good, I guess, because it just keeps you in the field, but at the same time, you're still just kind of stuck out there. The Furious Charge upgrade is interesting. 25 points per unit as a flat bonus. This means if you were going to try to pair Alchem Jackers with, like, the Feral Warriors, then your crazy chain axe wielding militia on the charge are striking at strength 5, which is pretty silly. Doesn't do anything to negate your problems with your low weapon skill or whatever else, and it also then becomes a pretty expensive unit of guys that essentially are wearing cloth and other linens for armor, but it's definitely something that's possible in a combination which would mean that on the charge you're actually throwing a fair number of dice that have the ability to cause some wounds. The next one is the Survivors of the Dark Age, and this one is really funny. I really like this one. Imperialis Militia Grenadier Squads and Imperial Militia Command Cadres with this provenance may take either a Legion Rhino Transport, a Legion Termite Assault Drill, or a Land Raider Proteus as a dedicated transport, so long as they number 10 models or less. However, all these vehicles, of course, are losing Legionis Astartes X special rule, gain the third line unit subtype, and reduce their ballistic skill to 4. So they're Land Raiders, but, you know, you still get penetrating hits on 14s, so las cannons rejoice. In addition, there's an option here. All models in an Imperialis Militia Reconnaissance Squad may be upgraded to have militia jetpacks to replace all weapons with 2 las pistols or auto pistols, and at 20 points per unit. Pretty cheap upgrade, which is good. Any Discipline Masters, Militia Medicae, and any other models assigned to the squad before deployment, but not models that join the unit by means of independent character special rule, may be given militia jetpacks for no additional cost. That's actually really awesome, because it means you're saving points if you're going to attach, like the support characters. A model with a militia jetpack may not be given any weapon with the heavy type. So the militia jetpack is pretty standard. It sets your movement. If you choose to operate it at the start of a movement phase, you gain a value of 12 for the duration of the turn. It allows you to move up to 12 regardless of movement characteristic, as you would expect. All models of the militia jetpack that have been activated ignore terrain while moving and charging, but dangerous terrain tests as per normal. And then, of course, they've got the same stipulations for running and such that every other jetpack has. Okay, so this is a fun option, even if it's not necessarily, like, great. So you're going to replace and give yourself pistols, so you're going to be shooting those just regular strength 3 pistols. Imperialis Militia Reconnaissance Squad is cheap-ish, I guess. 50 points for 5. So that's actually quite a bit more expensive for that base than you would otherwise expect. They're losing their shotgun, and they're gaining pistols and jump packs. They can't take any of the heavy weapons. The sergeant can be given melta bombs, but like it's not great. What's interesting though is that they do have the move through cover special rule, so I would have to take a look, but I feel like that would negate the problems with their jump pack and any difficult terrain, which is great, but I don't know. It's definitely a fun idea. The role of a unit like this is difficult for me to say because it's not particularly strong at doing anything. It's not going to be able to... It's not going to have very much offensive capability. It definitely doesn't have defensive capability, and it's taking a unit that was already pretty expensive and just adding something onto it. I do like the idea of land raiders in this list, and I think that'd be fun to model and whatever else, but unfortunately you can't even give them to everybody. It's only with specific squads. The Grenadier squads and the Militia Command Cadres. So if you were going to take Warrior Elite and then combine it with Survivors of the Dark Age so that you could have all of your standard troop choices, because of course Warrior Elite removes the support squad rule from the Grenadier squads, and then you can give all of them land raiders, you definitely could do that. And it would actually be pretty fun. And actually even you could take those Grenadier squads and put them all into termite assault drills and then do a subterranean assault, which also might be a lot of fun. That was something I think that a lot of people did last edition before Deep Strike changed entirely. So some of you will have these models already. Definitely fun. And there's definitely fun things you can do popping out of a termite with the special weapons in the Grenadier squad. The next one is my second favorite one. I don't know. I will tell you what, this is quite good. The Armory of Old Knight. All eligible models in a detachment with this provenance can upgrade las cannons to las rifles for free. Okay. We'll come back to that in a minute, but that's already quite good. The next option is Relic Arms. Eligible models in Imperialis Militia Grenadier Squads and Command Cadres may upgrade las cannons to either Volkite Chargers or Assault Needlers, may upgrade las pistols to either Volkite Serpenta or Needle pistols, may upgrade sniper rifles to Needle Volnus and heavy stubbers to Volkite Culverin, or Needle Cannon at the cost of 30 points per unit regardless of the number of models or types of weapons upgraded in a given unit. In addition, one more option, a force commander in a detachment with this providence may exchange a power weapon for a Paragon Blade at 10 points and or a las pistol for an Archaeotic pistol for a further 10 points. Lots of options here, just swapping around that war gear. So the Needlers are, of these, the Assault Needlers are pretty cool. An Assault Needler is a Strength 2, 18-inch range, Assault 3, Poison 3+, and pinning weapon. So in a squad of 10 Grenadiers, you are getting 30 shots of these at Ballistic Skill 3, wounding on 3+ because of poisoned, and then if you even force one casualty, you're forcing a pinning test. That's pretty effective shooting, especially against infantry or one wound infantry or things like that. Just massing fire, that's a lot of shots. The pinning is nice, and the poison 3+ is nice, because wounding is going to be a problem in a lot of other situations. Well, not exactly with this Providence, I should say, because of the power of the las rifle. So let's compare the las gun, which is a 24-inch range, strength 3, AP dash, rapid fire gun. And it has the exact same stat line, whether it's an auto rifle or a las gun. So mix and model, whatever, it's the same stat. However, a las rifle is very different. So a las rifle actually has two different settings. One is the las rifle has the volley mode. At 30 inches of range, it's still only strength 3. It's AP 6, which won't matter in a lot of situations, but it will in some. But it's heavy too. So 2 shots at 30-inch range as opposed to 1 shot at 24 or 2 in 3 inches or in 12 inches, which is pretty good. But it gets even better because the las rifle has the blast charger setting at 18 inches range. 18 inches, it fires at strength 6 and AP 4 heavy 1. So this is obviously a heavy weapon, and so you're not going to be able to move around much. You're going to have to position carefully and wait for your enemy to come towards you. But with a 30-inch range and then an even more powerful 18-inch range, that doesn't necessarily seem like such a bad thing. Now, I believe this is the exact same option that, for example, Solar Aux players already get, but it is nice to see it here as well with this Providence to allow you to get the same sort of offensive firepower. Enough Strength 6, AP 4, Heavy 1 shots in some of these 20-man squads will actually cause some hurt and some pain to actual Space Marines. It's probably one of the best options, I think, for offensive output if you're going for the whole stand and shoot gunline method. I also think that it would be very powerful and probably very thematic to have Armory of Old Night combined with Industrial Stronghold. The idea of a massive number of weapons, relic rifles, and access to a ton of tanks. It sort of fits that idea, for me anyway, of like a militia force that was also working with or near a hive world or a Canicum world. It definitely would be fun. It would synergize well within itself to basically take a large number of tanks and a large number of just regular militia members. And then, of course, you could add a couple of squads of those needlers in there as needed if you were just trying to bait out a pin for when your opponent comes down to close you in. I really like this. Providence, again, it's my second favorite. It's one of the reasons why in the 3K list that I've been playing around with for myself, this is the Providence. These are the Providences that I chose. The next one up is the Debased Rabble Providence, and this one has quite a few restrictions as well. Not quite so many as Industrial Stronghold, but still quite a few. So first of all, Debased Rabble must be given to an army with the Traitor Allegiance, so this cannot be done with Loyalists. All eligible units and models with this Providence gain Crusader and Hatred Everything special rules. However, they must always declare a charge targeting an enemy if they are able. Imperialis Militia Grenadier squads may not be taken in a detachment with this Providence, and this Providence cannot be used in conjunction with the Survivors of the Dark Age Providence. So Survivors of the Dark Age, they do not want you putting these guys into anything special as far as special vehicles or whatever else. This is a traitor only, and these are meant to be absolute lunatics. So Hatred is actually pretty good, and the ability to combine this with something like Feral Warriors, where you might be considering giving yourself an upgrade to your close combat weapons, sounds pretty awesome. Hatred is such a good ability that chaplains, which provide this for Space Marines, are almost an auto-include in any army that is going to include a very tough close combat unit. The ability to reroll misses in the first round of combat is amazing. It's even better when you consider the fact that with Weapon Skill 3, you're going to be missing a ton of the time. So having every melee unit in your army, or every squad of plebs in your army, be able to reroll their misses is quite good. It almost makes the cost of those chain axes really interesting and compelling. Now, if you were going to go for chain axes and whatever else, you were maybe kind of already leaning towards being a bloodthirsty psychopathic traitor. So it doesn't feel like a huge restriction there. And quite honestly, the restriction on the Survivors of the Dark Age isn't even that bad. Survivors of the Dark Age is the one where you can have your Grenadier squads or your command cadres take special vehicles. But, like, you're already being denied the Grenadiers, so you wouldn't really think about taking that one anyway. When you think about adding the Feral Warriors onto this, you already have a requirement with that Providence to do charges, so you're not even necessarily getting anything more or new as a restriction with the charge requirement in Debased Rabble. So Feral Warriors and Debased Rabble seems like a very strong, or at least good synergy pick to put together. Now, there are others that if you were trying to go for a sea of bodies sort of thing that you might consider taking it with, perhaps. But Debased Rabble, that ability to reroll all hits, it's really good. It's really important. Still aren't necessarily a ton of weapons in the militia rulebook that you can really use to make your opponent hurt in close combat, but by weight of numbers, you can probably take some things down. And free reroll is definitely one way to get that done. Next one up is Tainted Flesh, and this similarly must be taken by an army with the Traitor Allegiance. All eligible models receive Fear, Furious Charge. However, compulsory choice squads must be Imperial Militia Levy squads, and it cannot have more infantry units except HQ choices of other types than it has levy squads in it. So if you have 3 levy squads, you can have a maximum of 3 additional Imperial squads from other kinds. The only HQ choices that the detachment can take are Force Commander and the Rogue Psyker entries. So on top of that, Tainted Flesh, you cannot have Survivors of the Dark Age, Gene-Crafted Ogre Conscripts, or Alchemjackers. So, okay, Tainted Flesh is really interesting. Fear and Furious Charge, that +1 to strength when charging, is good. Fear is really interesting, but Imperial Militia Levy squads are hilariously bad. Being required to take tons of them are also really, really funny. Now, what's interesting here is that not only are you being forced to take the levy squads with the absolutely terrible leadership and the inability to regroup whatsoever if they get slapped, but on top of that, you can't even take discipline masters to try to ramp them up if you wanted to. Not that you wanted to, but if you had, you can't. So these guys are going to be charging and running and causing fear, but they are going to be dropping, huge squads will be dropping every time something shoots at them. It's really, really funny. Now, interestingly enough, there is no restriction on running this with Endless Horde, so you could put Tainted Flesh together with, like, Endless Horde and really just make an absolute nightmare of just too many bodies on the board for your opponent to deal with, and that might be kind of fun, and we'll get to Endless Horde in a minute, or Unending Horde, I'm sorry. But still, this one is pretty interesting. Now, let's just look at it right now. So Unending Horde, a detachment with this prominence, gains the Endless Horde 4+ special rule to all models in all Imperialis Militia Infantry squads and Levy squads, but all Imperialis Militia Grenadier squads are elite choices only, which isn't that bad, because there aren't a ton of elite choices you might be taking anyway, and chances are you're just going to want to spend more points on the regular schmucks. So Endless Horde is a special rule that says, when a unit composed entirely of models with this special rule has its last model removed as a casualty, the controlling player may choose to roll a d6. On a result of equal to or greater than the value in brackets, and for this provenance, that's a 4+, a unit identical to the one that was just removed as a casualty, that includes all models and wargear listed on the profile, is placed in reserves and treated as a new unit. On any other result, the unit is just removed as a casualty with no further effect. Any victory points that would be scored for the unit removed as casualties are unaffected and scored as normal, and any new unit that enters reserves may be used to score victory points if also removed as a casualty. Furthermore, if a new unit placed in reserves due to this special rule is later removed from play as a casualty, it too can be returned to reserves instead of being removed with play. A unit with this special rule that has been joined by a model after or during deployment, such as any of your characters like among the ranks, so like a Discipline Master or a Medicae, or even an independent character, is subsequently removed as casualties. So they don't churn, they don't recycle. So one thing that's really important to notice about this is that Unending Horde says on a 4+, when you destroy one of these squads, specifically militia, infantry squads, or levy squads, another one goes back into reserve. Now, it is only those 2 squads, 1, and 2, they enter reserve not with anything else, but they do have their war gear and whatever else. Now, because of the fact that these squads do not have dedicated transports, there's not even a discussion about whether or not that means any transport vehicle they would be in would come with them, because they don't, so it doesn't. On top of that, though, they enter reserves, which means they're coming in from your board edge. So, while this is a really cool idea and really fun, they will have a long way to go once they come back on the board. If you have a friend that wants to run this, just once, I think you owe it to yourselves, you and your buddy, to play an ambush mission with the militia player as the attacker. Just to, it's just like a shooting gallery. How many militia can you kill in 4 turns or something like that? Now, regardless, is this good? Well, any mission that involves you placing units on the board, you are going to have a much easier time keeping scoring units onto the board. Now, interestingly enough, if you do this with the levy units, and you use, for example, Tainted Flesh, and you give those units Fear and Furious Charge, levy squads aren't worth victory points. So you get no penalty whatsoever for churning these guys out like absolutely crazy, which is even funnier, really. Now, what can you give the levy squads? Well, they're still only weapon skill 2 and ballistic skill 2, with a sergeant that has weapon skill and ballistic skill 3. They come with a las gun or an auto rifle. The entire squad can swap that rifle for a pistol and a close combat weapon, or you can have everybody take a bayonet on their las gun or auto rifle. They can't even take crack grenades, which is really a shame, because if they could, that'd be funny. But they can be given frag grenades. The squads can be huge, though. One Levy Inducti squad can have up to 50 models in it. And for the kind of points you're talking about, it's really cheap, and you could very easily put hundreds of these models on the board. And with this unending tide, on a 4+, you're bringing that whole unit back. I kind of wonder, with the way the dice roll, if you want to have more units that are only 20 models apiece, as opposed to a ton of units, because, eventually rolling a 2 or a 3 or a 1 on this unending Horde rule is going to start hurting, because you actually are going to lose those squads. But in the meantime, let the bodies keep on coming. Man, this is a Volkite spammer's dream, just thinking about facing this force. I do like this. I am not insane enough to try to paint up 500 militia bodies or something. Hold on a second, let's do some math. So it's 40 points for the initial 20 of these dudes, and you can have up to 30 additional guys. That's 60 points for those 30 additional guys, so 60 plus the 40. So we're looking at 100 points for 50 levy squad dudes. Now, also, because of the fact that they have the strength in numbers special rule, which is a militia thing where you can pick up to 3 of these squads to fill a single troops choice, with their strength in numbers rule. So that means that I can have 6 of these guys troop choices, and I can take them at 300 points apiece. For 1,800 points, no big deal. I can have 600 troops. That's insane. That's terrible. It's a stupid idea. In reality, you would not want to do this, even if you were going to theoretically be doing the debased rabble thing, because of the fact that the levy squads don't score. They do not have line. So you need the regular squads in there as well. So let's do something a little bit more practical. Let's take 3 squads. Let's take 6 squads of 20. So 6 squads of 20. 6 squads of 20 comes out to 240 points. And that gives you 120 models right off the bat. You can use those as 2 troop choices because of the strength of numbers rule, and that means that you have the opportunity to take more infantry squads on top of that if you wanted to still use the debased rabble. If you take a similar number of debased rabble, maybe -1, the debased rabble at least start with weapon skill 3, which is great, and they have the exact same, actually they've got better options. But if you're going to think they're going to be charging into close combat, maybe you're going to do the close combat weapon and auto pistol or something dumb like that. Then with that combined here, let's see, 80 times 3, let's say 5. 80 times 5 is 400 points. So for 600, 700 points, you can have roughly 250 bodies, and then you still have points for support units if you want to. Now, there is nothing here to say that you can't run this as an allied detachment. And so that's the other thing that you could do, is that you could, if you were a heartless individual, as I am, you could maybe take a main force of something like Word Bearers or Iron Warriors and push these charnel troops right in front and let them die endlessly or run past the gun lines as you gun down everything else. I think that seems in character, and it would also be really awesome. Again, what's keeping me from doing this? I do not want to paint 250, 260 militia, because that sounds absolutely insane. However, it's definitely something to consider and really not that expensive as far as points. As far as your sanity and whatever else, there's a high cost attached. The last one that we're going to talk about here as far as the stats go is Abhuman Muster. And Abhuman Muster, this is for your classic Beastmen. So if you have some of those Zangor 40k models, this might be a place to use them. Any eligible units and models receive a +1 to their strength characteristic, but they lower their ballistic skill by 1 to a minimum of 1. And if they do not already possess a variant of the bulky special rule, they become bulky 2. All eligible models in a detachment with this provenance and the character unit subtype gain the Hammer of Wrath 1 special rule, or if they also had independent character special rule or monstrous, then they gain Hammer of Wrath 2 instead. And this one cannot be taken with Ogren conscripts. So you can see where this one you'd want to necessarily, I mean, it seems to pair nicely with Feral Warriors as well. Having a +1 to weapon skill and a +1 to strength is a nice little combination. If you're having them run forward with just pistols, then you don't really care about losing the ballistic skill anyway, because that's not what you're here for. An Abhuman Muster with chain axes strikes at strength 5, which is pretty nuts, pretty great. Considering the raw number of attacks that you're going to have, it might be, I mean, it'd be an easy to represent sort of thing. It matches the lore. There's probably models out there that would be easy to build for this, and this one sounds fun to me. So just quickly to wrap this up, I guess, I would like to talk about 4 options that I think are fluffy and potentially a good amount of fun. Spark something creative, new, and a little bit different in the sort of games that you're playing. Definitely to throw a little bit of variety into the all-marine meta that we've been seeing probably pretty consistently since the start of Horus Heresy, because it is, of course, the Horus Heresy. So we're going to start off with the one I'm calling the Old Guard, and this is kind of what I mentioned right at the start of the video, and a combination that I alluded to right away. Taking the Warrior Elite and the Legacy of the Great Crusade. I think that having troops on the board to represent veterans, group that was called back into service, pressed back into service, maybe a crusade element that was able to retire on a planet, thought their war was over until the heresy rears its ugly head, and now they find themselves trying to survive, fight back for the Imperium, or maybe just fight back for themselves to keep a little bit of chunk of something that they have done. I think there's definitely a lot of storytelling there to go along with it. And I think that Warrior Elite and Legacy of the Great Crusade have natural overlaps. +1 to leadership, and also the ability to take those Grenadier squads, those elite squads, as regular troop choices, and not having the support squad rule attached to them definitely gives you that feel and gives you that vibe, and I like it. I don't know that this is definitely it's definitely not the crunchiest option, because a lot of it puts weight onto the Grenadier squads, which I think are a little bit overpriced in this PDF, but it's still an option that, as far as the narrative goes, it feels right as you put it together. The next one is something we're just going to call way too many dudes. Now, keep in mind that dudes is just a generic term here as a placeholder. It could be dudettes, it could be anything, beast people, however it is you want to do it. If the militia list is showing us one thing, it's that quantity over quality is definitely the way that they think they're going to get things done. So there's lots of options for you to do this in different ways. Now, you can just flood the board with the Unending Horde. You can combine that with something like Feral Warriors or Abhuman Muster. You can do Tainted Flesh. There's just lots of different things you wanted to do. If you were going to do the pure Horde, just the total insane gum up the works, I would think that Endless Horde and Tainted Flesh might be the best combination. Largely because the Endless Horde, if you're not using levy squads, then having so many extra units on the board that are really easy to kill means that if there's any sort of kill points going on in your mission, you will just lose, without a doubt. So Tainted Flesh and Endless Horde seems like a really solid pick to me there. Otherwise, you could go with something a little bit more specific and chaos-themed, like the Abhuman Muster plus Feral Warriors, which gives you that +1 to your weapon skill and a +1 to your strength, and then the ability to give chain axes as well. So that sounds like a pretty good combination there. Some rules like Alchem Jackers you might think that that's something you want to take, and the ability to ignore assault or ignore leadership. But honestly, when you're talking about putting this many bodies on the board, I think it almost might be better just to ignore leadership altogether and hope to overcompensate with numbers as opposed to trying to find a way to keep them alive, because it might just not be worth it otherwise. If you're taking this as your primary detachment, you can bring on like discipline masters and throw them with these squads, but even then, the inclusion of what is essentially an HQ choice for 20 points, it's only bringing your leadership up to 8, which is still really easy to fail, especially with some of the things that the game has to manipulate leadership. I think if I was going to go for a total crazy person build, I think I would skip leadership, not worry about it. Some of these guys are going to run away. A lot of them are going to die, but that's why there's so many of you. The next up, and this is just a cop-out because I like them so much, Ogrins plus something. I don't really care. The Ogrins seem cool. I think they're one of the more fun units and definitely one of the more different things. They're pretty tough. They're not that expensive for how tough they are. And if you could find a way to put something around them to sort of give them a little bit of support, then I definitely think they could be a lot of fun. 2 big squads of Ogrins in the middle of the board with support from some other force, whether that is Survivors of the Dark Age, so you can have a couple of other, like, for example, subterranean assaults of, like, dudes with special weapons and things like that, so command cadres, or, you know, whatever. But Ogrins as a staple in this list, or flip the switch entirely and go horse people. I would find a way to build something around those, or just make sure that I had one of those units in no matter what. Lastly, and this is the one that I think I like the best personally, it's the one I'm going to use, and it's probably going to be one that you see very frequently, and we're just going to call that the Old Tech. This is Industrial Stronghold plus Armory of Old Knight. And so this is going to be giving our infantry las rifles. We're taking this so that we can give our infantry las rifles, and then also so that we can take Layman Russes and more of them, because they are probably the best unit in the PDF. The ability to take Industrial Stronghold and go from being able to bring 3 Layman Russes to potentially 30 is really dumb. It's really dumb. Now, to take 30 Layman Russes without any upgrades is 3,600 points, and you filled no other slots whatsoever, so you're not going to get to 30. But the point is that these units, how tough they are, they're third line, which makes them a little bit less tough, but it means they're never worth victory points. Their access to good weaponry, they're really, really amazing. So having infantry with better than average las guns and the ability to upgrade to things like the Needlers or the Volkites if you want them, and then having all those tanks, it's a really, really powerful combination, and it really definitely matches that idea of the Guard gun line. So that about wraps it up for this one. I really appreciate everyone listening, and as before, if you could like and comment, share the video if you'd like, or consider supporting the channel with a tip, it would be really helpful and helps keep the content coming. There are definitely some problems with the militia list and some issues. I definitely think this is a good narrative book, and I'm definitely going to put something together, a force of this together, probably as like an NPC interaction or something for like a weekender event. But it definitely doesn't feel like it's got the same strength, and there are definitely some big hurdles when compared to some of the other books, some of the other splats, and how they work. So I'm going to talk about a couple of the issues with the book and some ideas on how to overcome those things, some of those things that could be done in the future, and just some of the things to look out for when planning or playing the militia. Anyway, thanks so much, take care of yourselves, and we'll talk to you soon.